Notre Dame defensive coordinator Al Golden is on the move, so where will Notre Dame go to replace him? Is the answer already on the staff? Plus, Luke Smith and I find the good and the bad and break down everything we liked and didn't like from the national championship game. That's next on Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports, and so glad you're here with me on Thursday, January 23rd, and thanks for making this your first listen of the day. Quick reminder to subscribe on YouTube or your preferred podcast platform, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, jam-packed show today. We got Luke Smith on again, as we do after every game of the season, to break down everything we liked and didn't like from Notre Dame's loss to Ohio State in the national championship game. But before we talk about the game, we shared our thoughts on Al Golden's departure from the program, as he is now headed to join the Cincinnati Bengals. We covered so much in the show today that we weren't able to get to the players who announced their decisions to enter the transfer portal, including Sam Pendleton, Deion Colzie, and Jaden Thomas, but I will make sure to cover that on tomorrow's show. For now, let's bring in Luke to talk Al Golden and the national championship. All right, Luke and I are both back from Atlanta, thankfully. There was a moment on Tuesday where I wondered if we were ever going to make it back, but we did. We are here to break down the three things we liked and didn't like from the game against Ohio State in the national championship. But before we get to that, we got some not-so-breaking news on Wednesday that Al Golden is leaving Notre Dame to become the defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. This has been rumored for days, but I'll admit, it still stings now that it's official. So what was your reaction to the news?
Ultimately, it's not surprising, but to me, it is interesting how the tenor around this conversation shifted. Really felt like for months, the whole narrative was there's no way Al Golden's going to leave. He's not interested. He's happy at Notre Dame. And everybody made such a big deal about the extension Notre Dame had given him before the season, pointing to the 4 years on that contract, how much he was getting paid. But obviously that didn't really mean much. Now, I understand that 3 years is a long time for a college coordinator, but I do think it's interesting how quickly that changed. Like, was there no buyout there? Has there been anything reported on that? Was there an NFL clause? Because everybody made a huge deal about that extension. It doesn't look like it mattered at all.
I think it mattered. I think it just really narrowed down the list of potential suitors for Al Golden. Like, it sounded like he didn't want to entertain any other college jobs. He was perfectly content. But I think that there is a special affinity for Cincinnati, for Al and his family. I mean, he spent a few years there as the linebackers coach before he joined Notre Dame staff as the defensive coordinator. I think the family really enjoys the area. And I do think that there was always a pull for Al Golden to go back to the NFL. And something that John Bryce from Football Scoop mentioned that I never even considered is that maybe there's a desire for Al Golden to become a head coach in the NFL. He's already tried it at the college level. Didn't really work out, at least not at Miami, but I think that was not really his fault there because there was so much other stuff going on. But if that's true, if he does want to become an NFL head coach, I think he's probably capable of doing that, and his coaching style might be more suited for that league because he's so good at the X's and O's. And if that's what he wants to do, it makes sense to go to the Bengals, be a defensive coordinator there, try to turn things around, and then maybe that will set him up for an opportunity to get a head job at that level. I mean, he's only 55 years old, so I think that plays a factor in it all, but I really don't think there were many other jobs he would have taken to leave Notre Dame, but unfortunately, this is the one.
Yeah, I guess it is. And it's still risky, right, too, because I think Zach Taylor and co. really run the risk of being fired next year if they have another disappointing season. So it's interesting for that reason, too. But I definitely understand the pull back to it. I'm a little bit surprised from the Bengals' perspective that they went back to this tree after Golden worked for Lou Anarumo, and then they fired him. But that might be more of an indictment on how bad the players they have on the Bengals defense are than any coaching, but somebody just had to take the fall. But it is interesting for that reason, too.
Yeah, I do understand the sentiment, especially considering like Zach Taylor. You think that if the Bengals don't make the playoffs next year, are they going to clean house? But then you remember that this is the same organization who kept Marvin Lewis employed from 2003 through 2018. And you have to imagine the Bengals are going to be better next year with Al Golden and everyone they have on offense. But there is a world where they have another really disappointing season. What happens if Burrow gets hurt again and they win like 4 games? Would that be enough to clean house? And then Al Golden is just sitting there after one season with the Bengals. Obviously, I don't want that for him, but I think it's a real possibility and something that I'm sure he at least considered before he accepted this job.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we'll see what happens, but it's just, there's definitely some risk associated with it.
I also don't really understand the people who think that like he had one foot out the door before the national championship. Like the Bengals fired their defensive coordinator on January 6th. And I'm sure that the first contact that they had with Al Golden was not this past week. I think what happened there was his agent had been working behind the scenes. Al probably expressed interest to his agent saying, hey, yeah, I'm interested in that job. And then the agent works with the organization and then gets to this point where he does the interview now that the season ends. But I don't know. Did you put any stock into that? Do you think that his interest in this Bengals job had anything to do with the fact that the defense did not play their best against Ohio State?
No, and I frankly think that's a very immature reaction for anybody that has one. And people had the same reaction with Clark Lee before the ACC championship game and the Alabama game in 2022. And it's just unfair. It ignores the fact that these defenses were going up against superior talent. And yes, they didn't play their best, but I just think that's silly. And a lot of the mistakes they made were due to poor technique, not coaching. So I just like it's an immature reaction, if you ask me.
I think it's fair to be disappointed that Notre Dame's last game with Al Golden as defensive coordinator went so poorly. That was probably the worst game that any Notre Dame defense has played in his 3 years at the job. But also, yeah, they were going up against one of the best offenses that we've ever seen. And they have Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator. And sometimes you just lose those battles. But now that Al Golden is officially out the door, it seems like Mike Mickens, Notre Dame's current defensive backs coach, is the most logical option to replace Golden. I really can't think of anyone else. And I really don't want to lose Al Golden and Mike Mickens in the same offseason. And I feel like if Notre Dame does not promote Mickens, that is certainly going to be a possibility because there are going to be other teams around college football who are looking for a defensive coordinator and might see Mike Mickens as the perfect fit. So do you think it's going to be Mike Mickens? Is that all said and done? Or do you think that there's another candidate that I just haven't mentioned or even thought of?
I think it will likely be Mike Mickens, although I would not be surprised if Notre Dame took a swing at a former Notre Dame defensive coordinator. Just throwing that out there into the ether.
John Tenuta?
Yeah, exactly. You hit it. I was thinking him or Corwin Brown, but I don't know if Corwin Brown ever coached again after he got arrested. So probably not him.
Well, unfortunately, Bob Diaco just accepted a job with Bill Belichick and the UNC Tar Heels. I don't think he's defensive coordinator, though. I think he's going to be the linebackers coach, correct?
I think you're right, yeah.
Yeah. Man, how great would that be to bring big game Bobby D back into the fold? But we're obviously joking here. I think we all kind of expect Mike Mickens to get that job. Do you even think they will conduct like a national search, or do you think it's just like Mike Mickens gets the promotion? Because Marcus Freeman has also been very public about the fact that he thinks Mike Mickens has been ready to become a defensive coordinator for some time now.
I think that they have to because it's not doing due diligence if you don't do that. I think it's also a bit of a unique circumstance. I'm not really sure who the rising young defensive coordinators are. Like there have been in years past, it feels like if you look at the sport right now, I feel like the guys doing it the best are veterans like Golden or Jim Knowles at Ohio State. And it's also interesting because Oklahoma is still looking to hire a defensive coordinator. I think there's also some speculation that Wink Martindale at Michigan might go back to the NFL too. So you could have some big time jobs opening up because one of the things that has been rumored is that Jim Knowles is going to take that Oklahoma DC job. So then Ohio State opens up in that case. So there's just a lot of interesting factors at play here. And I'm not really sure who all the candidates are.
You're right. Tom Allen was pretty highly sought after. Now he's with Clemson after his season with Penn State. So it would be, a different move, but this is also something that Notre Dame just done before, right? And I saw some people who expressed their concern with hiring Mike Mickens to be the defensive coordinator, considering he has no coordinator experience. And I understand it, especially when we're going from a guy like Al Golden, who's been around for a really long time and had head coaching experience. But the difference now is Marcus Freeman is going to be entering his 4th year as the head coach as opposed to his first year. So I think he needed that help and he needed that experience a little bit more then than he does now. And also, when Clark Lee was hired to be Notre Dame's defensive coordinator, he had only been with the program 1 year as the linebackers coach, and he had no prior coordinator experience either. And then he ended up just being an elite defensive coordinator and then got a job in the SEC as the head coach. So I think Mike Mickens is actually more prepared to take that job now than Clark Lee was back then. So I have confidence that if Notre Dame does end up promoting Mike Mickens, it's going to work out the best for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that Mickens obviously has a bit more of an established track record just with developing and turning out corners going back to even Cincinnati. So I think that's fair, but there's always risk associated with somebody who's never been a coordinator before. But I think it's a risk that Notre Dame is and should be willing to take.
Is there anything else that concerns you about Mickens taking the job other than inexperience? Because I think, some people might be concerned that, well, if he's the defensive coordinator, maybe he won't be able to spend as much time with the secondary, but he could still be the quarterbacks coach and the defensive coordinator. Most coordinators also coach a position, like Mike Denbrock coaches the tight ends. And then now that Al Golden is gone, that frees up one more spot on the staff. So now they could hire a full-time safeties coach to kind of give Mickens some support, because once Chris O'Leary left, they did not have a full-time safeties coach. So he could still get some help in the secondary and handle all the big picture stuff that is required of a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that does give me concern. I know Nick Saban obviously coached defensive backs, but just off the top of my head, and I don't know, it feels like often when I think of a defensive coordinator, I think of somebody associated with the linebackers, but maybe that's the wrong assumption. So that's a little bit just unique, at least as far as Notre Dame's been concerned, even right their last 3-4 defensive coordinators. So that's a little bit different, but outside of that, nothing really I can think of.
All right. Any more thoughts on the Al Golden, Mike Mickens situation before we move on to the national championship?
No, it'll just be interesting to see if there are any more staff defections as we go through this offseason. The odds are there probably will be, but I have no idea who. So that's something we just wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, this is what happens when you have a really good team and you have a great coaching staff. Everyone else in football, both at the college level and at the NFL, sees that, and they try to get in on that action. But for Notre Dame's sake, let's hope that Al Golden is the only departure from this staff, and they can continue to build on all the success that they had this past season, which leads me to the national championship. Luke will be right back here with us in a second to break down everything we liked in the national championship game, including some young stars who have emerged on defense. But first, I want to tell you about Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It has never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege and enter promo code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege, promo code SPACE80. Luke, you and I have been to big games like this in the past. There was a moment there where it felt like it was going to be a repeat of 2018 Clemson, 2012 Alabama, when they just got blown off the field. But Notre Dame fought back, made this a game, had a real chance with 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter to maybe get the ball with the chance to tie it, send it into overtime, but they ultimately fall short. So I would like to focus on the positives here to start, even though they lost, and go through our 3 things that we like. So what stands out to you first?
So while Atlanta itself is a complete disgrace and should not host major events.
We'll get there.
Yeah, on a more positive note, I do have to say that the atmosphere and excitement of everybody getting together for a national title is just incredible. It'd been 12 years since that had been the case. I think this time around, with more perspective, having graduated from school there, it was even cooler just to see how many people came in for it, getting to catch up with people over the course of the weekend. And just going to the airport and seeing so much Notre Dame apparel and just so many Notre Dame people around Atlanta, it's special, and it's not something that happens that often. Of course, I wish there had been a better outcome, but I think just the atmosphere of everybody getting together and excited like that, it's second to none. And that was really cool. I'm glad we got to experience that.
The atmosphere before the game was unbelievable. Like when both teams were coming out of the tunnel, all the pregame stuff was electric. And I was so excited and really just so grateful to be able to experience that because it was so cool, especially with these two teams going at it. I feel like Notre Dame fans were really well represented in the crowd. I would say probably like 55-45 Notre Dame, although it's kind of hard to tell when it's that close. But you have all that built up excitement. Notre Dame gets the ball to start the game. And they go 18 plays all the way down for a touchdown. That's the first thing I liked. Notre Dame never comes out and throws the first punch in these types of games, and that's exactly what they did. Now, they weren't able to keep that momentum going, but I still want to take some time to appreciate that drive because it was just unbelievable smash mouth football. 18 plays, 2 third-down conversions, 2 fourth-down conversions, and it culminated with a Riley Leonard walk-in touchdown. That guy was basically being used as a crash dummy in that situation. He had 9 carries for 34 yards, and I think you could definitely make the argument that they used him too much on that drive, and that affected him on the second and third series. But in that moment, that was so much fun, and I was so glad that we were able to experience a moment like that one of these games because we hadn't really all that much in the past.
Exactly. It's not something we'd seen before, taking a lead in a game like that. So that was tremendous. Some of this narrative around it with hindsight 2020 is kind of a little annoying to me. Like, well, of course that wasn't sustainable. Or I thought to myself, oh, this is just, Ohio State testing what they can or can't get away with. Screw that. When that happened, it was loud in that stadium, and I felt like Notre Dame was going to physically abuse Ohio State. Now, of course, that's not what happened, but it was a special drive and one we'll never forget. And I think anybody that watched that game probably won't forget because it was physical. It took so long, and it was incredibly impressive that they weren't afraid of the moment at all.
And when Notre Dame first got the ball and they lost the coin toss, I was like, man, this isn't great. I did not have high expectations for that drive, but credit to him. That was a great script, and they marched right down the field and scored. And I thought that was the type of drive that could potentially bait Ryan Day into getting away from his game plan to try to make a statement that they could be more physical. But it seems like Ryan Day learned from those mistakes. And honestly, I really, really hate Michigan even more now because I think if they had won that game barely, then maybe you could get Ryan Day to make another mistake like that. But because of the outcome of that game and how it all played out, I feel like he really learned his lesson and actually applied it this time around.
Yeah, and actually just a brief sidebar, after watching Ohio State and seeing the weapons that they do have, the fact that they lost that game to Michigan, I know they just won the national title, but to me, that's actually even more of an indictment on Ryan Day. Like, that is pathetic that they lost to Michigan with what they have. Just what on earth? It makes no sense. It might be the worst loss in college football history. So, anyways.
And that's coming from a team who lost to a MAC school in the same year they went to the national championship.
Yeah, it's somehow worse than that, believe it or not, based on the talent assembled along the field.
I have no idea how that happened, but we don't have to spend too much time on that. What's next on the things you liked?
I want to start with Drake Bowen next because he, to me, was the best defensive player on the field for Notre Dame. He was actually the highest graded defensive player for either team by PFF, and he had 7 tackles, obviously forced that huge fumble on the Ibuka play, but he was just talking to the other team the whole game. He didn't seem intimidated at all. He didn't care what the score was. There was a play where I think it was Christian Gray who just got truck stick by Judkins, was it?
No, it was Ibuka on the sideline, but it was on the Ohio State sideline. So he runs over Christian Gray, and then Bowen came in and delivered a blow right back.
And started talking to him because that's just kind of who he is. He's going to be a leader for this team next year, probably highly motivated by the loss that happened. I will be interested to see or hear if he quits the baseball team. I kind of hope he does, to be honest. Not that he was playing a bunch last year, but I just like him to spend even more time around the football program this spring. So great performance from him. Not intimidated by the moment at all. When it seemed like at times some guys on the defense maybe were. So that was good to see.
He was exceptional in this game, and you could see there's some pictures of him after the game just on the sideline, so dejected, but he's still very young. I think he exceeded all my expectations that I had for him this season, and the future is really bright for him and the rest of those young linebackers. But staying on the defense, I want to highlight Leonard Moore here because that dude is such a stud. He was not afraid of the moment at all. This is a true freshman cornerback playing against the best wide receivers in the entire country in the national championship, and he was not afraid whatsoever. They only targeted him 3 times in this game. He allowed 2 receptions for 14 yards and had a pass breakup while he was covering Jeremiah Smith. This is a true lockdown corner, so he was exceptional in coverage, but I thought the best play of the game that he made was when Quinshon Judkins was running to the end zone on that 70-yard run. It looked like he was going to walk in for an easy touchdown. Leonard Moore chased him down. He's become really good at that, and I saw it on Twitter that he reached 22 miles an hour on that play, runs down Judkins, tries to force fumble. That doesn't work, but still, like, that's the type of effort that you want to see from any player on the team, and I am just so excited about his future because I think he has a chance to be just as good, if not better, than Benjamin Morrison, which seemed insane to say before the season.
Yeah, he seems to be kind of the next corner to next man up, so to speak. And by that, I mean in the realm of just being a really good corner, not just next man up filling in. But I agree. His speed is really impressive. He was great in coverage. It'll be interesting to see if they maybe try to cross-train him this year to just at the other side so he can play a little bit more there, because I don't think he was super comfortable with that. I think that was a little bit of a misconception, too, on the Christian Gray play. Moore just doesn't really like playing on that side right now, okay? And that's why
Moore doesn't like playing the field?
Correct. Like, they were not – like, he wasn't – that's not how they line up against guys one-on-one like you do in basketball. And I think that gets forgotten sometimes. But I think next year, like, with given his skill set and given a little bit more time in the offseason to train that way, he could be really strong over there. So that'll be interesting to see what happens.
It's kind of an unanswerable question, but let's say Benjamin Morrison never gets hurt, right? And he's got the boundary side locked down. Is there a world where Leonard Moore beats out Christian Gray to play the starting field corner position at some point during the regular season? Again, there's no way that we'll ever know, but do you think that could have happened if Benjamin Morrison never got hurt?
I just don't know if he would have gotten the opportunity necessarily, to be honest with you. So it's hard to say. I think he also probably got more confidence and got better as the season went on too, right? And playing more. Yeah. So that's kind of what came with that. So I would probably lean towards no, to be honest, just because I don't think he would get the chance. So maybe this is a bit of a blessing in disguise. But I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. And I mean, maybe if Leonard Moore was going to play, they would have had to move Benjamin Morrison to field. So anyway, we're never going to know the answer to that question. But what do you got next?
So what I have next, got to talk about Jaden Greathouse's emergence over the last 2 games. Not sure where this was all season, but this looked like the guy we saw dominate elite high school competition in Texas. He's not necessarily going to blow you away with his speed, but at his best, Greathouse is a confident, smooth receiver who runs great routes and can make plays on the ball. He was the most productive on the field, most productive receiver on the field the other night, on a field that featured Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, and Carnell Tate. And as Pete Sampson of The Athletic pointed out, caught 25% of all the 30-yard passes allowed by Ohio State this season. Over the last 2 games, finished with 13 catches for 233 yards and 3 touchdowns. And the plays he made on both touchdowns in this game were incredible, both after the catch and then kind of the one-handed catch he had on the second touchdown. But that's what we were looking to see, and that's what Notre Dame's going to need next year as well.
They were great plays. That second touchdown in particular was such a great catch. And I also think part of it had to do with the fact that Riley Leonard just kind of threw it with nothing to lose in that situation. It didn't seem like he gave his receivers a ton of chances to make those kind of plays where it's just, hey, one-on-one, you're not necessarily open, but I'm going to give you a chance to catch it. But considering Notre Dame was down by so much in that moment, he really didn't have a choice. So he chucks it up to Jaden Greathouse. He makes a great play, and that's sort of the downside of Riley Leonard only being in the system for 1 year, because I feel like if he had one more year with Denbrock and Notre Dame, he would really take a big jump, but unfortunately, that's not going to happen. I just think that he trusted specifically Greathouse so much more at the end of the year than he did at the beginning, and that's partially why I think that Greathouse wasn't able to put up as much numbers as he did until now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in a slightly different offense next year with a quarterback maybe more conducive to throwing, he's going to have some better opportunities.
All right. I want to give a shout out to Jack Kaiser and Xavier Watts. And you could throw Mitchell Evans in there as well, because these guys just gave it all to Notre Dame, and it sucks that their careers ended with a loss. But I thought Kaiser and Watts specifically, they played exceptionally well in this game. I mean, Watts had 8 tackles, a tackles for loss, and a pass breakup. Kaiser had 5 tackles and a TFL as well. And watching Kaiser talk in that post-game press conference was tough, man. You could tell how much it meant to him to play for Notre Dame. I mean, this is a guy who grew up in Indiana. No one had really any expectations for him when he was a recruit coming out of high school. So for him to have the career that he had and then to get Notre Dame to this point, I think is just a testament to what those guys have done throughout their careers. And like I said, it's a bummer that it ends with the loss, but I'm so glad that they were able to experience this stage because they gave so much to this program.
Yeah, I mean, both had incredibly resilient careers, much like this team, and I think probably embodied the team in some ways with Watts, with all his position changes, Kaiser coming in, like you said, lowly recruited, ultimately both being captains. It was great to have them representing Notre Dame this year, and I am glad that they got to that title game. Came up a bit short, but for no lack of effort on either of their parts.
Before Luke and I break down everything we didn't like about the national championship and more specifically how Atlanta completely botched the entire event, I want to tell you about something positive, like Game Time. Attending NFL playoff games is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, and the connection with other fans are unmatched. I remember the thrill of seeing my favorite team clinch a playoff win live, and it is a memory I will never forget. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters, being there. I used Game Time Picks to grab tickets for a recent playoff game, and it could not have been easier. I found a super deal that gave me incredible value for amazing seats, and I could even preview the view from my spot before buying. The all-in pricing is a game changer, no surprise fees at checkout, plus knowing my tickets are backed by the Game Time guarantee gave me complete peace of mind, and their curated deals make it easier to find the best price on great seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's talk about Atlanta.
Oh, God. Where do we start?
I just want to say to anyone who is listening, if you're from Atlanta, if you were born there, this is not about you. This is about one weekend in particular. I have never seen anything like this. Just a masterclass in incompetence across the board. I don't even know where to begin.
I know. And like I think also so the airport is part of this conversation too, but really
that's the headline.
It's largely the area around the stadium. Because I think if you got outside of downtown, Midtown is a little bit better. Like, Virginia Highlands is cool. Buckhead's cool. But for the area that actually needs to host the events, my goodness. If we could curse on this thing, I would go off for about 5 minutes because it was the worst display of hospitality I have ever seen. Horrible bars, just not open or at capacity and horribly understaffed. I don't know why this city gets major events. It's a dump around there. It's truly a dump. There's construction all around the stadium. The weather was awful, which I know is outside of their control, but this goes to my point. Why do they get major events if the weather's so unpredictable? There's some other things I want to get to, but those are the first three. Like, what are you doing from a hospitality standpoint?
So pretty much right away, we get there Sunday, and we're trying to just go out, get somewhere to eat and watch Bills Ravens. And every bar, every restaurant is crazy packed, like you mentioned, violently understaffed. And they were just running out of stuff. Like they just ran out of beer at like 6 p.m. And it's like, I understand it's a Sunday, but it's also a holiday weekend and the national championship is in town, folks. In case you forgot, it's the two biggest brands in the sport traveling to play the biggest game of the year in your city. And it was like it completely snuck up on them or they had no idea what was happening. So that was bad. Then, you mentioned the terrible weather. Then you go inside the stadium and I think like a bunch of the men's bathrooms, they had maybe like 3 urinals or some of them just weren't working. So then the lines were super long. And then after the game, it was a nightmare getting out of there and everything is closed. There's nowhere for people to go. There's nowhere for anyone to get a ride. So like we could pass blame all the way around. It's like, it's not just the city. It's all not just the stadium. It's not just the airport, but the airport was by far the worst.
Yeah, but before we get off the stadium DJ too, by the way, holy, he made DJ Sticky Boots look like a Grammy winner, like DJ. This guy was awful. Just no feel for the room. You think even Ohio State fans had to be like, dude, what are you doing? Like, that was just ridiculous. Just yelling and laughing on the thing, making no sense. It was the worst in-game stadium entertainment I've ever seen. And we've all seen Notre Dame Stadium. It's not good, okay? Right? Like, it's bad. This was horrific. But yeah, the airport. Let's talk about that for a minute, because I was fortunate enough to have a later afternoon flight, and so everybody who was less fortunate gave me the tip on how to avoid the 3+ hour security lines. And of course, I think most people know by now the answer to that question was you Ubered to the international terminal, which is miles away from the rest of the airport. There's no line there, though. You get through in 5 minutes, and then you take the tram to wherever your gate is. And thankfully, my flight featured no delays or cancellations, because I know that happened to a whole hell of a lot of people who spent the night overnight in the Atlanta airport after missing their first flights due to the egregious security lines. If you're going to have 70,000 people fly out the next day, what are you doing, like, not being prepared for that? Like, it's funny too, because the airport has this PA address that, like, every 5 minutes says, "Welcome to," what is it, Hartsfield International Airport, the world's most efficient airport. It's like, oh my God, that is a joke.
It was unbelievable, dude. When I walked in, the security line was going up and around baggage claim, which just created more of a hassle. And there is just a different level of human angst when you're at an airport. Like, everyone was so on edge to begin with. And I got there, I had a morning flight, I'm in line, and I realized I got there an hour before I boarded, and I had pre-check, so I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to be just fine. And even if there is a bit of a line, like, an hour with pre-check should be plenty of time. And I realized right away I'm going to miss this flight. And that was around the time where we found out this little secret hack to take the international terminal. But at this point, I wasn't certain that it would work. So I left the line thinking, man, I hope this works out, because otherwise I'm missing this flight. And Atlanta was going to be hit with a winter storm in like a few hours. So I'm thinking, man, I'm going to end up getting stuck here. And this is just awful. So, I mean, we've already complained about the stadium, the area surrounding the stadium, but this just makes no sense to me. This is the biggest airport in the entire country after a holiday weekend. Like, how could you be so unprepared for something like this? It is truly mind-boggling to have security line 3+ hours long. People had to wait outside in freezing temperatures, and they're just waiting and waiting and waiting. So when I finally got to my flight, it was about 50% full because so many people were still in line. So then we ended up getting delayed, and then they think they just moved some people around. But it was just a nightmare experience for everyone involved. And like, I feel for everyone who made the trip. And, you know, obviously Notre Dame fans didn't get the result that they wanted, but going through that experience, especially seeing people with families have to deal with all that, like, it is just unacceptable. And I really don't think they deserve to have any Super Bowl. I think they're going to have a World Cup event in a few years. Like, they have so much they need to figure
and a
out.
Final
Like,
Four.
Yeah, it just literally can't happen. Like, you cannot botch a weekend like this to that degree and ever get anything back. Like, you should not have second chances in this case.
Well, and this was their second chance, because they did have a Super Bowl in 2019. And listening to Stanford Steve and SGP today on their podcast, they talked about flying out after that one and it somehow being even worse that day. So I don't know if it's a South thing. You're just like, you don't really care. Like, that's what one of my buddies alluded to who lives in the South. He's like, I just think people are kind of slower down here. They move slower and they just aren't really ready for it. But a couple last things. The tailgate lots, what the hell were those? That was like, that felt like we were in like a prison tailgating, basically. Like, you're underneath an overpass in like a weird, sketchy parking garage. You have to hop around a chain link fence to get down there. It's freezing, which isn't their fault, but it's just, it was kind of a walk still to the stadium, probably 20 minutes, not ideal. And then if we're talking about just hospitality, once again, an elevator broke, the Notre Dame team hotel just flew down shafts and sent a lady to the hospital.
Damn, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, I heard of another hotel where employees didn't even show up because the weather was so bad there. Like, just what's going on in Atlanta, man? They cannot host events.
No, they can't. And I'm sure that people on the Notre Dame and the Ohio State side are giving people hell there because that's just unacceptable. And, this is a city that already hosted one playoff game earlier. They got the Peach Bowl every single year.
And the SEC championship. Why are they hosting the All-Star game? Like, it's not a good city for this stuff.
Yeah, and the message that we've kind of heard since this happened is like, oh, this is just how it is here. This isn't like a one-off. This is just kind of how things operate here. So, yeah, I think we covered Atlanta. I mean, we could talk about the other things we didn't like from the game. And, obviously, when Notre Dame loses and they go down 31-7, there's a bunch of different things we can pick out. But I really do want to talk about the 3rd and 11 play that ended the game because, I've after a play like that, I feel like it's easy to get really upset and point fingers and everything. And now that time has sort of passed here and I've had time to watch it over again and really think about the situation, I just am so disappointed in the play call there. And look, I understand that you want to be somewhat aggressive in this situation. Like last year when Notre Dame was playing Ohio State, they gave up the 3rd and 19 play because they dropped 8. I'm not saying you do that. And Ohio State had just ran it on the first 2 downs. You also don't want to give up another Will Howard run for a first down as well. But it's 3rd and 11, 2:45 left, and you've got 1 timeout. Ohio State just ran it twice, and they know that if they run it again, then Notre Dame is just going to burn their timeout, and then they have 2:40 left with the 2-minute timeout. So now Ohio State's not going to run it. They're going to throw it. Notre Dame blitzed 6 plus Xavier Watts on a delayed blitz. So they were effectively in cover 0. And Don Schuler had to help out Rod Hurd, who fell on the play immediately. And up to that point, Christian Gray had already given up 5 catches for 77 yards, and he's lined up one-on-one with Jeremiah Smith. If I'm Will Howard, I check to that immediately. I don't know if that was the design call before the play, but at the moment he saw that, there was no doubt in the world where he was going to. Plus, he's on the field side, so Jeremiah Smith had so much room to beat Christian Gray. He does it with ease, and I'm not even really upset about what Gray did on the play, even though his technique was awful. Anyone who is put in that position, even Leonard Moore, who we just raved about earlier, is probably not making the play because it's really hard for any corner to make a play on a player of that caliber in the open field like that. So I just was really disappointed with the coaching staff for putting him in that position. And unfortunately, that ended the game.
Yeah, I definitely get bringing pressure there, but I agree. There should have been somebody over the top there. Unfortunately, there wasn't. Similarly, if that's Benjamin Morrison out there or somebody in that situation, obviously you feel a little bit better. And that was one of the things that I couldn't help but think throughout the game was just it would have been nice to see this team at full strength. I understand everybody has injuries. Ohio State had lost linemen too, for sure. But I think part of what Notre Dame had so much success doing against Ohio State the previous 2 years was, one, they kind of baited them to run with just being able to get home with 4. And that ability was completely mitigated with the loss of Riley Mills, your best pass rusher up the middle. And then you also don't have Boubacar Traore or Patello out there, or probably your 2 next best edge rushers or pass rushers from the edge. And you don't have Ben Morrison out there, who was a stud in those 2 games. And it just would have been nice to see those guys out there and seeing what that would have looked like, because I think it's a little bit different.
Yeah, and the fact that Notre Dame made it to this point, despite all the injuries that they suffered this season, is a huge accomplishment. And as I talked about yesterday, and others have talked about this as well, like you never know when you're going to get back because it's going to be really hard. You might not get as favorable of a path as Notre Dame got this year, but hopefully in the future, when Notre Dame makes more runs in the college football playoff, they aren't decimated by injury. There's going to be some, but this year it was just taken to a whole nother level, and I feel like that's something that is always going to sting, but also kind of makes you appreciate this run a little bit more as well.
Definitely, and for that reason, it's just really unfortunate that we aren't going to get to see this team play again. It is interesting how long this season was. I was talking to people after the game and people who I sat with at the Texas A&M game, and we were like, that was almost 6 months ago. Like, that feels like a completely different lifetime ago. Like, a lot of things have changed, and like personal lives, like, career-wise in the last 6 months, and this team was still playing. As some student pointed out to me too, games were played in both semesters. Like, that's pretty strange. That's a long, long season. And I think that for us personally as fans, it was super enjoyable to get to watch this team play. They were so much fun, just the way they dominated. Obviously, got a bunch of monkeys off our back between the Major Bowl, beating the SEC champs, winning Miami, just all those things. Like, that was awesome. But wow, what a long season. And it's really unfortunate we're not going to get to see this team play again. And I think, like, obviously I would have been ecstatic if they won the game, but I'd even still have that feeling even if they won the game. It's like you kind of want to you keep wanting to get more from this team because they were that fun to watch, which is not how I think either of us would have thought of them after September 7th.
Yeah, it really hit me today, or yesterday, I guess I should say, when I was walking into work, first day back after this, and you realize that the season is over, and it was just really depressing. Obviously, the outcome makes it worse, but we had really high expectations for this team going into the season, and honestly, I feel like they still were able to surpass all of mine, especially when you consider the injuries. It wasn't always fun this year. I mean, that stretch from like Northern Illinois through Miami, Ohio, and maybe you could even throw Louisville in there as well because that was such a weird game. Like, it wasn't that great, but then that stretch, really starting with like USC, because that was essentially a playoff game, all the way through the end. This team gave us so many great memories, so many fun times. I mean, two of the biggest wins of our lifetime by far, and this was just such a fun run, and this team was really fun to root for, and I'm certainly going to miss it. And I do think that because this was our first season with the expanded playoff and Notre Dame played 4 more games, like, regular season games starting next season are going to feel different because, like Notre Dame opens a season against Miami. And while that's going to be a really exciting game, season opener, we're all going to be hyped. It's not going to feel the same as like Texas A&M this past year because we hadn't experienced such a long season. Like, that's just going to be about survival next September. It's just going to be like, let's get through it. But when you're watching your team play in games of this magnitude, you realize just like all the highs and lows of being a fan. But this team gave us so many highs this season, and I'm just always going to be very grateful for it because this was so fun.
Yeah, it was a tremendous ride. Disappointing final outcome, but so much fun. Wouldn't trade any of what did happen, besides maybe September 7th, for anything. It was outstanding. But I think that's a good point on how regular season games are going to feel a little bit different. And I think that college football in general feels a little bit different. It's going to get viewed differently. I mean, I don't really like talking about this, but the ratings were down for this game. Like, it was like the I think lowest rated title game in 5 years, which makes no sense given the brands. But there was a lot of commentary on social media about, is it just me, or like, does it not feel like the national championship is tonight? Does it not feel like there's any hype for this? And like, obviously for us, it's a little bit different because Notre Dame is in the game, but I would actually agree with that sentiment. Like, if you take my fandom outside of it, like, it didn't feel as big as I felt like it should have been. And I think part of that is just because the season was so long. It's so long and it's running right into the NFL playoffs. Yeah, you can't compete with that. Especially after the divisional round. Like, I think there was like some football fatigue, right? There was games on Saturday and Sunday and then one more. So they got to make some changes to the seeding, the schedule. I think what they need to do is just move everything up and then try to end the season around the same time that they used to, which would probably require them to move conference championship up a week. Like, there's a lot of changes that need to be made, and we've got plenty of time to talk about it. But you got any final thoughts on this game? Because next week we still got our postseason award show, so we're going to do some reflecting on the season as a whole. But this game specifically, anything else? No. Heck of a ride. If you've been looking, the reason I haven't tweeted this week is I was unfortunately suspended for a week immediately after the game when Ian Rappaport decided he needed to tell the world that, Al Golden was going to go to the Bengals because he's a tool. And I told him to respectfully sit on a cactus. And apparently that's a week's worth suspension. So I am not avoiding the app. I will be back on there shortly, but that's what's going on. All right. That's a great way to end it. Luke, it's been a pleasure. And we'll do it again soon. Like I said, postseason award show next week. All right. Let's do it. That's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. As I said at the beginning, I'm going to be back tomorrow to break down the latest news in the transfer portal. I know it's the offseason, but the news never stops. So make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you are listening to the podcast. And if you enjoyed the show today, remember, give this video a like if you're watching on YouTube, or rate the podcast 5 stars and leave a review. Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you on Friday.